Hello everybody! I have been shopping all over the place. I've been traveling the last few months. And you folks are the beneficiaries because I am about to put 20 items on eBay. And it is a really diverse and interesting group of things. And I think you're going to enjoy them. So let's take a look. This first piece I got in Tijuana, Mexico. But it is far from home there because it is Acro Agot. This is a really pretty jadeite Art Deco planter, and it is solid heavy glass. Acro Agot was known mainly for making marbles. They operated in Clarksburg, West Virginia from 1914 to 1951, and marbles were their big thing. They did make some solid colors. They didn't make a lot of marbles in jadeite, but they started doing the jadeite because they also made the inserts for all of those cool old smoking stands that you see from the 1930s, and they did a whole line of planters in the 30s and 40s, and this is one of them. I just really like this Art Deco ribbing in the design. It's such a creamy, smooth color of jadeite, and it is quite substantial. And this is a fairly large piece for Acro Agot. A lot of what they made was really small. They made children's dishes, they made little tiny vases, they made wire frames that vases would hang from. So they did a lot of really cool stuff besides the marbles. Although the marbles are the thing that most of the people who know Acro Agot are collecting these days. So this is something a little bit different. It's a great color. It would go well with Fire King Jadeite or McKee if you collect those companies. And it's just something a little different. We're going to start this at just $9.99, no reserve. So check it out. You can go to the links underneath the description of this video and click right on them and go right to eBay. This next grouping here was by a woman named Annalie Thorndike. And Annalie came up with the Annalie dolls. This is an unusual set because it has the teepee and it has both of the figures that go with it. You usually don't see this set complete and intact. Here's the second figure. Annalie Thorndike was a young woman, and in the Depression years, she came up with the idea of painting felt to create dolls and sewing it together. And there is the tag that says Annalie. The important thing is that this is one of the ones made in the USA. This was done in 1997. The company offshored after she died in 2000. So if you want the original stuff, it is the Meredith, New Hampshire mark that you are looking for. She started making dolls based on what she saw her children playing with. And her children were boys. And in the 1950s, they were really into cowboys and Indians. And so that's where she got the idea for doing this three-piece set with the teepee, the gentleman with the peace pipe, and the woman holding the fish. Because they're on the smaller side, these are really well detailed. Look at the colors of the fish. I think these are really cool. When I met Tiffany from Thrifting Vegas, she was really into Annalie dolls, and she got me really noticing them again. And they're just really cool. All the painting was done by hand. They had a very small staff in New Hampshire who worked with them for many years. This was all done in their kitchen at the table, and eventually they ended up with a small factory. So it's a great story. The three-piece set together typically sells for around $65. We're going to put this out at just $19.99 and let the market determine what interest level there is, but it's hard to find all three pieces together. Our next piece is by a ceramicist whose work I have highlighted here several times, and this is an unusual piece we haven't shown before. This is the work of Sasha Brastoff. And Sasha Brastoff was such an influential designer, so modernist, so mid-century, so ahead of his time. And part of the reason that his designs were so outlandish is that he had a lot of experience working in Hollywood. For example, he did all of the clothing and designs for Betty Grable in the movie Diamond Horseshoe. And if you've ever seen the movie Forbidden Planet, the metal sculptures, a lot of those were done by Sasha Brastoff. So he really was an influential designer. He got started in clay art because he thought it was interesting as a child, and then he ended up winning a prize for whimsy from the Syracuse Museum of Art in 1939. He then was drafted in World War II and did a lot of performances in the USO and a lot of costuming. And you could just see all of that, the whimsy, the interesting designs. There's his signature, Sasha B. If you notice on the bottom, there's just a number. That means this came from his first factory. The first factory burned down and was replaced by a more opulent factory on Olympic Boulevard in Los Angeles. And when that opened, it was a star-studded gala. Edward G. Robinson came, so did Zsa Zsa Gabor. Mitzi Gaynor was there. Joan Crawford and Donna Reed were patrons of his. So it made a big splash with Hollywood. And I can understand why, because look how fun and interesting this design is. This one is totemic. Is it a face? Is it architecture? It's just so many different things. It's so abstract and interesting, and the colors are good. This is a relatively large one. This would have been sold as a vase. It's about 7 inches tall. And again, we're going to start this at just $25. The true value of it is probably twice or 3 times that. I'm really excited to show you this piece. This piece is only here because viewers of my channel told me, hey, you missed something. You need to go back and get that. This was found in a junk shop in Tijuana also. This is Karen Howell ceramics and is the Legend of the Rabbit Moon series. And this tray was done in 1987. Now, Karen Howell mainly did tiles and mosaics in installations and private settings, but when she was laid off as a teacher in the 1980s, she took her previous experience with ceramics and started her studio in Trafford, Pennsylvania. There is the only mark we see on the back. So when I saw this piece, it was very cute, but it was really dusty. And I picked it up and I said, oh, this is neat. And I showed it on the channel, and then I set it back down. And a bunch of you folks said, wait, that's something really good. And you must not have seen this piece before, and I really hadn't. But apparently a few other YouTubers had, and so people knew about it. You see the rabbit, he is just living his best life. And there is a bunny in the moon there. Now that is based on a Japanese legend. We talk about the man in the moon and the moon being made of cheese. Well, in Japan, the moon is occupied by rabbit. And this shows that very well. He is having the best time. He's plucking carrots. He's dancing under the moon. And the rabbit in the moon is looking down on him. It's just a really cool thing. And it's really well made. And that's why I guess it should have dawned on me to pick it up in the first place. Because you can tell that it's separate glazes painted under each other. And then it had to be fired a few different times for these different colors. There's a little bit of texture to it. It's really a nicely made piece. And you folks said, I hope you bought that, because it was really inexpensive. It only cost me a few dollars. And it turns out that because she didn't do a lot of other work publicly, but is known as an artist in ceramics now, these sell for as much as $75. So we are going to put this one on at just $29, and we're going to let it bid up to whatever the market today thinks that it is worth to them. I think it's a wonderful piece, and I'm so glad that you folks educated me, because now I know that Karen Howell is definitely a ceramic artist worth looking for. She studied at Alfred University just like the Gliddens did, and that is a pretty prestigious place if you were a ceramic engineer or a ceramic art student to go to school. So she has quite a pedigree, and she is retired, so no more of these are coming along. And I just want to say how grateful I am for my viewers, my subscribers, and my members, because I try to help educate you about antiques and vintage, and you in turn help educate me about antiques and vintage. And if you want to have first dibs on these items, These are member bonus videos, and so the members do get early access. So if you're not a member, consider becoming a level 2 or level 3 member, and then you can have early access to these pieces. So if you're going to the links and you're saying, gee, some of these things have already sold, that's the reason why, is you're seeing it after the fact. But a membership will take care of that. I know in the current context there's a lot of dispute over trade with Mexico, but we've had trade with Mexico for a long time, and that's how this piece also ended up in Tijuana. And wow, am I glad that I do business with Mexico, because I was thrilled to find this at a mercado in Tijuana. This is a Mack Bulldog, and it's a ceramic piece again. It has a mark on the bottom from about 1970 saying it is a limited edition by the Keith Smikle Associates in New York City. I've seen other pieces by the Smikle Associates, and they all typically are related to advertising. I've had the Curity Band-Aid nurse before. There's a doctor that's some sort of a pharmaceutical company that they did this kind of work for as well. They did this Bulldog as a premium to be given to some of the people who do business with Mack Trucks. And look how realistic it is. The molding is really very good. That face, it's just amazing. And the story behind the Mack Bulldog is interesting too. The trucks had a very plain, flat, rounded face. No grill, just a big rounded nose because they were basically armored. And so the British troops gave the Mack Bulldog its name. And Mack Trucks caught on to that and said, hey, we like that. And by the 1920s, they were calling their trucks the Mack Bulldogs. By 1932, one of their chief engineers, while he was having a hospital stay during surgery, got bored and carved a Mack Bulldog out of a bar of soap. And that became the classic hood ornament that they use on Mack Trucks to this day. And from that came this cool ceramic guy. So an interesting chain of events that led to this being made. It's in great condition. He's standing on a little green grass field. And he's cute and tough all at the same time. This was another thing that I found that I just thought, well, this is interesting. I haven't seen this before. It turns out to be pretty pricey. These typically sell for about $85. But again, because I was fortunate to get it inexpensively, we're going to start it at $29. And we're going to let all you folks have fun with it and tell us what it's worth. So we are putting this on eBay right now. You can tell I was on the West Coast because I found a lot of fun ceramic things this month. We've got another bunny here, this one with the giant ears. This is Rio Hondo. This was a company that was in business in El Monte, California from 1939 until the 1950s. And those eyes are the giveaway to Rio Hondo. They did a lot of cute, whimsical items. This one is one of the more exaggerated. Sometimes they had a paper label. This one does not have any mark. They never did an ink stamp or an embossed mark, so you really just have to know the look. But they're so fun. And like the rabbit we saw before, well, he has a carrot, of course. This is a little more embellished than most Rio Hondo is, and it's a larger figure than most Rio Hondo figures in terms of the height. They did mainly miniatures. In fact, I'm going to put up a picture of a display window that was done at one of the big department stores in California featuring them so that you can see the kind of things they did. It's all whimsy. It's all really cute. The eyes have it. These only cost about a quarter or 50 cents when they were new. Nowadays, they seem to sell for about $15 or $20 each. We're going to start this one at just $9.99. When I was a kid and we lived in Florida, and we went to pick Grandpa up at the airport, he flew in on an Eastern Airlines Whisper Jet. Now, they didn't let him take these home, but at some point, Eastern Airlines went out of business, and all of these glasses from the 1970s, from the first class cabin, came to market. And we have a set of 4 here. Eastern was one of the first big airlines. It started in 1926, and it was originally one of the ones with the airmail routes. Well, there was a big scandal about how those contracts had been awarded, and a lot of the airlines folded, shifted around. Eddie Rickenbacker, who was the World War I ace, ended up taking over Eastern Airlines, and he made it a giant success in its time. They owned the New York to Miami market all through the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. And they ended up expanding and flying all over the Western Hemisphere. It's hard to believe there was a time where nice glassware and silverware and actual china was used on airlines to serve people. And it wasn't even just for first class back then. Even people in the regular cabins got to be treated well because airline travel was very expensive. The rates were regulated, everybody charged the same, and so which airline you chose really had more to do with how they treated you. And for a long time, Eastern had a really good reputation for the way that they served people in the cabins. And these glasses reflect that era. What changed? Well, deregulation happened. And Eastern Airlines was hit really hard by that, because a lot of low-cost carriers popped up that competed with them on price, but also because Eastern Airlines developed a drug problem. They were fined a giant amount of money in 1985 because 1 ton of cocaine was found in the cargo hold of an Eastern jet. Some of their employees got involved with a smuggling ring and were bringing large quantities of drugs on Eastern Airline jets in the cargo holds. And that gave the company a really bad reputation all of a sudden. And so what had been the official Disney World airline came to a halt in 1991. And at that point, all of the things that had to do with Eastern Airlines were sold off. And that's how come these glasses are available to us. And they're just really fun. So if you are an airline memorabilia collector, or you just like fun glassware, they definitely have a 70s look to them. Well, these would be fun to have in your collection. So these will be flying off to somebody's bar soon. We're starting these at just $9.99 for the set of 4. When you think of American ceramics that are collectible, Roseville often comes to mind, Rookwood comes to mind, but the company that was actually the biggest and most successful back in the day was Samuel Weller's Pottery, which he started in the 1870s. In 1896, his daughter Luelsa was born, and so was this line, Luelsa, which was vaguely named after her. You see on the bottom here an impress mark with an arch that says Luelsa and Weller, and this was number 55, the jug. Luelsa was marked this way from 1896 to about 1909, and then the mark changed. So this is a first generation Weller Luelsa piece. The line kept going until 1924. They were really into artware, and this was painted under the glaze, and look how beautiful that is. Layered and ethereal, very similar in a way to the way the Karen Howell tray was done. And you've got the big leaf on the top. These colors are very much in keeping with arts and crafts style of that era. You look at this and you think, well, these are 1970s colors. Well, these were also 1910s colors. The artware line had only begun a year before this line came out because the original Weller factory had burned down and they rebuilt a much larger factory with the help of the people of Zanesville, Ohio. And because of that, they were able to do an artware line as well as utility wear. And that's when things really took off for Weller. By 1909, Weller was the largest pottery company in the entire world. The layered underglaze painting is just so sweet and so nicely done. We're going to start this one at $49. It does not have a buy it now. Some of these pieces will have a buy it now, but this one we're just going to let run and see where the market is today for this beautiful piece of pottery that was a big feature at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, where Luelsa and other pieces were made in a kiln on site. Now, to be a true antique, you have to be 100 years old, and this piece just turned true antique. And this was from a convention of Wisconsin retail marketmen. It even has the original information on the back by Whitehead and Hogue Company. And they were the company that really made celluloid advertising buttons a thing. They started producing in 1896, and one of the first things they made were buttons for the presidential campaign of William McKinley. So to have that information on the back is really interesting. I get the feeling that this one was never used, because the only ones I've seen otherwise all seem kind of frayed and worn. It is in immaculate condition. Love the color of the apple. And the ribbon is very, very clean. At this time, every city had some sort of a market where you brought your produce. Seattle had the Pike Place Market. New York had Gansevoort. There were markets in every major city. And so your market men at the time, it was mostly men, were the people who got together and put these markets together so that they could bring produce and meat and things directly from the farms and sell them directly to large customers as well as small retail buyers. So this is from their 7th annual convention in Wisconsin. A lot of these markets came together in the 19-teens. I know Pike Place Market started around the same time. So this is a pretty early piece. It's in great shape. We're going to start it off at $9.99. I think it's worth $25 to $30. We're going to find out together right now. I was so excited to find this next piece when I was traveling in a very rural, remote town in Colorado, because it is a beauty, and most people think these came from Fenton, but this is way earlier than that. We call this hanging hearts today, but when this piece was made in the 1920s, it was known as Heart and Vine, and this is by the Durand Glass Company. And look at the beautiful gilding on the inside. People think hanging hearts were something that Dave Fetty, that Fenton came up with, but he was actually reviving an old pattern that had been done back in the 20s by Durand Glass and Imperial Glass. Imperial Glass used a very orange interior, but Durand did this soft, wonderful gold iridescence. Durand started his glass company in Vineland, New Jersey in 1924, and it only went for 7 years because he was killed in a car accident in 1931 and the factory closed down. Durand is not typically marked. There is the pontil on the bottom where the piece was blown in the blowpipe. It is just gorgeous, and this is a hard piece to find. We really don't see a lot of Durand glass in general, and we see very little in this pattern and color. Durand was able to do this because he brought Martin Bach Jr. from Imperial Glass to be his art director. And Imperial was developing their Heart and Vine, or hanging hearts as we call them now, at the same time. He also was able to hire people from the Cazal Company. Cazal did very wonderful goldish glass like this. They did a lot of shades and things. They went out of business in 1924. So it just happened to be the perfect combination where he had these decorators who knew how to do this wonderful iridescence, this beautiful metallic glaze, and a designer who understood how to do this wonderful patterning. And it all came together in these really, really sweet, pretty vases. These are really desirable, and they are worth some real money. And I have to admit, I paid some real money for this piece. This was not a thrift store price. We are starting this at the price I paid, which was $195. My belief is that this is worth approximately twice that. And I base that on the fact that Durand glass is so desirable in the marketplace, so seldom found, and made for such a short period of time that it is just scarce. I think it's a wonderful piece. I know there's a lot of folks out there who really like hanging hearts, and I've seen Fenton pieces by Dave Fetty in hanging hearts sell for more than $395, which is our buy it now on this. Another thing that has just become a true antique, I'm very excited to bring it to you, and we're going to put it up now and see who out there loves it as much as I did when I saw it. This next listing is a grouping of 3 items, and they are crap shooters playing dice. These are very unusual and hard to find as well. These are by a fellow named Alvin Meyer. I'm going to show them to you individually. They have a certain crudeness to them, but Alvin Meyer was actually a very gifted ceramicist, and you can see his signature on the bottom there. Alvin Meyer was a Chicago artist, but he studied and trained under Paul Manship, who was a very important instructor at the American Academy in Rome. And they thought so much of Alvin Meyer's work that they gave him the Prix de Rome, which was a full scholarship, a very hard thing to achieve, and especially unusual to be given by the Italian government to an American. And these are very folksy looking, but look at the detail, the patches on the pockets. There's the signature again. You see there's a little bit of a place here. This is a firing defect. These typically have these. There was something about the way that they were done, and in the kiln, pieces would just not come up. And so you often have a little bit of a hollow in the hands or the appendages. Alvin Meyer is also known for heading the sculpture department of the Chicago architecture firm Holabird and Root. And they did the figures for the Chicago Board of Trade building, which is a very important structure still there today, as well as the Chicago Daily News Plaza. So this guy was a really seriously important sculptor and ceramic artist. But these pieces, which have more of a whimsy to them, were something that he did for a very brief time, and they are rather scarce and rather expensive. These sets of 3 typically sell in the $500 range. There we go. So it's the 3 pieces in the set. This guy has just rolled the dice and he is praying for double 6s. And these guys are waiting to see what happens. This particular set was purchased by a friend of mine on eBay, and he paid $450, and that was about 20 years ago. I do believe the value of these is around the $500 range. We're going to start them at just a little more than half that amount, $295, and see where the market takes these. But they are very scarce and very much desired by both Black Americana collectors and people who understand Alvin Meyer's place in the world of sculpture. We have another really significant glass piece as well. This very stylish, very controlled paperweight would seem to be anonymous until you find this little etched mark right there between the 2 circles that are the reflection of my lights. And that is Rowe, R-O. That means that this paperweight was done by Rowe Purser. Rowe Purser is a really significant glass artist. You may not have heard of him as a paperweight designer, but if you know art glass marbles, he is the father of the art glass marble movement in the United States. He started blowing glass in 1967, went to the University of California at Berkeley, which was actually a very noteworthy school for glass blowing. A lot of important glass blowers who worked for Orion and Flume, or, for example, Storini, Abelman, they all went to Berkeley. It was pretty much the place, if you weren't a Pilchuck artist, you were a Berkeley artist on the West Coast if you were into glass. And while he was there, he met Richard Marquis, who became a collaborator and a mentor to him. And eventually the 2 of them, after he built from scratch with no prior knowledge how, he built his own glass kiln and furnace without any formal training in that part of the business. And there is a lot to know about building a kiln. He went through a lot of trial and error. But by 1975, they had started making art glass marbles with sulfides, clay figures, and similar designs inside of them that sold for $3.50 a piece. A lot of those are worth $350 today. This paperweight is a very good piece by him. The design looks very much like something from the 1980s. Since then, his work has been shown in the Corning Glass Museum and the Toledo Glass Museum. He is considered a really big deal. And this being a paperweight rather than a marble, it's a little more substantial piece by him. Part of what I love about his story is that his love of glass started because his mother bought a slag glass lamp at a yard sale for $5 when he was 8 years old, and he was just fascinated by the colors in the glass and thought, I want to know how that's done someday, and that led him to become a glass blower. So see how thrifting and yard saling can be life-changing. This piece has the colors and the geometrics that bespeak 1980s glass. I just think it's really handsome, and I'm going to surprise you all because I think it's a pretty good, rather valuable piece by putting it out for just $9.99 no reserve. We're going to take a chance on this one. I think he is an important enough artist who's well known, and I had the good fortune to find this again in Tijuana at a vendor booth. I wasn't sure what it was. I just knew it was good. They didn't know what it was, and so we can offer it at a very low price and then let you folks tell us what the value really should be today. And that's part of why I like doing these eBay auctions. People tell me, oh, you should just pick a set price and set it on there and wait for somebody to come along who understands it and wants to buy it. But I look at it and I think, this is a chance to share something really fun with a whole bunch of different people and let them discover it and let them help us all discover what the current market is. It's nice to have a snapshot as of a particular point in time of what the customer interest and the value levels for these things really are. So that's why I like doing eBay auctions, and that's why we're here. The last few months while I was traveling, my friend Jonathan, who helps me with my eBay store and helps keep it running, I'm very grateful to him for all his efforts. He was the one who did all the shipping, and so we did a whole lot of books and paper ephemera. We only have one book this time, but it is this one. And this is a very interesting book, actually. It's called Bahadur Means Hero. And it was by a woman named Sheila Solomon Klass. And it says it's a novel about cultural misadventure. It's a really interesting first edition with the dust jacket. First edition, first printing from 1969. That's important, by the way, because there's first editions, but sometimes there's multiple printings of the first edition. The first printing of the first edition is the original, and the OG is what you really want. It's an interesting book in that it starts out with a glossary, and it talks about some various words in Hindu and in India, and you notice that Bahadur, the title, all Nepali servants in India are called Bahadur, and that is where the story begins. This book is about a Nepalese servant who goes to India and ends up working for an American professor and his wife. And the American professor and his wife treat him very well, but a little bit paternalistically. And he becomes used to having a certain amount of money and a certain amount of prestige because of his position. He meets a love interest in the market, does his best to impress her with his money and status, but eventually the Americans move on and he ends up working for Indian masters, and they do not treat him as well, and his life really changes. And so that's why it says it is a novel about cultural misadventure. It's a rather interesting book, and a book that apparently has rather a following. It's a very specialized niche, but this book typically sells for about $25. Sheila Solomon Klass had a 30-year writing career, and one of her more interesting books is called Soldier's Secret, about a woman who disguises herself as a man to fight in the American Revolution, which is loosely based on a true story. So she was an interesting writer, and this book is going to be something that I think someone will really enjoy. For dinnerware collectors, the name East Liverpool, Ohio rings a bell because that's where Fiesta Pottery and Homer Laughlin are made. But at one time, there were many other ceramic companies operating there, including this one. This syrup pitcher is by a company called Knowles Taylor and Knowles. And they have a nice signature on the bottom here. They started in 1870, and they were known for ironstone and semi-porcelain. You see the ironstone china mark on the bottom here. And they made these into the 1890s. And this pattern is called Moss Rose. And it's nice because they have decoration on the back as well as the front. This sort of hairy-looking bud on roses is the moss rose, and it is a real flower that was very popular in Victorian gardens, and that's why this pattern became a really big pattern starting in 1808. The Wedgwood Company did it under the Edme line. A lot of other companies picked up on it. It was done as late as the 1960s by Japanese companies who realized that there was nostalgia for these older pieces. But this one you can tell by the shape of the handle, the fact that the mark does not say made in USA, and just the general way it's made. The syrup with the little pour spout here. This piece would have been done sometime around 1880 to 1890. So we're looking at something that's almost 150 years old, and it's still in wonderful shape, and it would be happy living on your table to pour syrup. It is one of the most famous dinnerware designs from the early years. Moss roses fell out of favor in gardens because people wanted roses that just were the flower and didn't have that hairy aspect to it. I think they're really charming, and I think this is a very sweet little piece. I've always liked syrup pitchers. There are people who just collect syrup pitchers because they're interesting and they have the design of a larger piece, but they can be fit on a shelf, and you can get several on a shelf because this is only about 8 inches tall, as opposed to giant water pitchers or washstand pitchers or those sorts of things. So it's a neat piece. We're starting it out at $49. They typically sell for somewhere around $100. And we're going to see if someone else appreciates moss rose the way that our parents and grandparents did. When I do shows, I like to have little cases full of interesting things. And one of the things I always bring are a bunch of pocket knives. I have never sold a pocket knife online before, but we're going to start now because this one I think is very interesting. This is a Case. Case is perhaps the most famous American brand. They are still making them in Bradford, Pennsylvania. And if you go to their website online, you can see how they make them. It's actually quite fascinating. Pocket knives are always described by the number of blades. And then if you notice on this bottom piece here, 6344 SS, that's the model number. And then on the bottom of this blade, you have Case XX. Double X stood for the fact that they tempered the steel twice in these. And that meant that they were very strong and very durable and resist corrosion and a lot of other good properties to them. And that's why the Case XX brand is one of the most collectible brands of pocket knives. This particular one with that signature appears to be a Stockman design made in the 1960s with a bone handle. Case makes a lot of specialty knives for collectors now, but back when this was made, pocket knives were really a utility thing. They weren't things that people collected because they were snazzy or had interesting designs. They were things people bought to actually use. And because of that, it's important when you're looking at pocket knives to see how much they've been used, how much they've been sharpened. Are they cracked? Are they chipped? Are there things missing from the blades? These are all in very good condition. The handle is not loose. The rivets are tight. This is the condition you would like your pocket knife to be in. And to make these seamless and really nice quality so that they open and close easily, there is a lot of handwork and hand finishing that goes into these, and that is why Case is considered a really good brand and is probably the most collectible of the American pocket knives. The handle is made of paddle bone and then dyed, so that's why you have that nice dark color. So it's a great American story. The condition's really nice. I'm starting this at $9.99. It's probably a $25 to $30 pocket knife, and we will see what the customers on eBay think of it. In the 1960s and 70s, there started to be real interest in folk art, and people started noticing these really cool duck decoys that carvers had made in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and even earlier than that, and got interested in collecting them. And that spurred a whole group of artists and carvers to start making ducks again. And that, along with the preppy movement in the early 1980s, where ducks were a theme, led to ducks like this. This handsome mallard came from an estate sale in San Diego, California, and it has a mark on the bottom, a double mark actually, for Max Thompson. And this one's dated 1982. It says Mallard Max Thompson 1982 at the bottom. And then he double signed it to the woman whose estate we were at. To Karen, best wishes, Max Thompson. So it's a double signature, which makes it really neat that it was personalized in that manner. And that means that she went to a show or someplace he was selling these and met him in person. And this is very realistic, very much like the original decoys. It has glass eyes. The painting is to be as naturalistic as possible. And the mallard, of course, is a very handsome duck. Max Thompson did this work in Mission Viejo in the 1980s and is no longer with us. So there have not been new ones of these being made in about the last 30 years. And as a result, there is a good secondary market, not just for Max Thompson, but for artist carved decoys from this era in general. There is really a lot of attention being paid to them now. And the ones that are very good and really look like the birds that they are tending to do very well in the marketplace. Part of the reason that these are popular and selling for what we consider to be good prices in the $100 range is because the originals that were made by known artists a century before are selling for enormous money now. There was a sale at auction of a circa 1900 pit-tailed drake done by Elmer Cromwell, who is one of the few known early carvers of these, and it sold for $546,000. And that's why decoys like this that are artist signed and are very good are selling in the $100 range now, because they are a relative bargain, but they are absolutely handmade and very nicely done. We're going to start this one out at only $29, but I have a feeling it will float off for significantly more than that by the time the auction ends. This is another item that was just misplaced. I found this at the Mercado in Tijuana, and it's Captain George Vancouver. It is a wonderful large bronze, and it's definitely on the large and heavy side, about 4 1/4 inches round. The bust of Captain Vancouver is a scarce one. I don't really know what the origin of this is. It doesn't have any information on the back, but it does look like it was mounted to something. It is possible that in Vancouver, Canada, or one of the other places named after Vancouver, that it was used as some sort of an installation on posts or something like that. The way it's done, the style, the lettering indicate 1950s or 60s production. Vancouver, of course, was quite significant because he was on the voyages with Captain Cook, including the one where Captain Cook was killed in Hawaii, and he ended up being the captain of the Discovery. And the Discovery left Australia, went to New Zealand. There are places named after Vancouver in those countries as well. And then went up the West Coast and did significant, very detailed mapping of all of the West Coast, from San Francisco all the way up to Southeast Alaska. Because he made that voyage, the Spanish ended up ceding their claims to the land in the upper West Coast. That is why Canada and the United States ended up having those lands eventually. He mapped 86,000 miles of coastline, and it was a really significant thing because in doing so, he proved that the Northwest Passage did not conveniently cut from Hudson Bay over to the West Coast, and that you would actually have to go through the Arctic if you wanted to get around North America, which was a fact in dispute at the time. So Vancouver was a big deal. This is a very handsome likeness of him. I've only seen one other one for sale. So if anybody has any more information about these, well, let us know in the comments. We're starting it at just $9.99. My guess is that it's probably worth about $50, but we're going to find out now. This is another reason sometimes we do eBay auctions is people say, well, just pick a set price. How do we do that? None of these have sold before. We are the pioneers. So we're going to find out now what the market thinks these are worth. In this day and age, automatic garage door openers are things that people just expect. But that was not true 40 years ago. And that's why if you bought a Lincoln Continental, they gave you a garage door opener kit. And you would have a special place on your sun visor that you could press a button. And if you installed this on your garage door, well, then you had a garage door opener. And that was something that only wealthy people had, because you had to have money to buy a Lincoln back then. The Lincoln Continental was a beautiful car that came about because Edsel Ford, Henry Ford's son, well, he was raised with money, and he wanted something nicer than a Ford. So he had a special car made for him in 1939, and it was so impressive and so deluxe that Ford decided to put it in production, and that was the beginning of the Lincoln line. This is the kit, and you see the Lincoln Continental logo on the top there, because they wanted to, of course, make sure all your friends were very impressed by the fact that your car came with an automatic garage door opener. This is the entire unit. Apparently was never installed. This was for a car that was sold in Waco, Texas originally. And apparently they must have had a carport or something where they didn't use this, because it is all wound up in the original box with the original paperwork. Now, this might seem like a funny thing to sell on eBay, but for somebody who has a 1979 Lincoln Mark V, it would have worked for any of the Lincolns really from the mid to late 70s into the early 80s. And they did, in fact, do these openers through about 1985. And at that point, garage door openers started to become more of a standard thing with houses. But this is the entire unit, never used. And so this is something that, for a car collector, is a really fun novelty, something that you wouldn't think of in this day and age. But car people who collect are very serious, and they love having all the accessories and all the doodads. And that's why when I saw this sitting in an antique store for $8, I thought, that is going to be something that some particular person out in eBay land is going to need. And so we're going to put it out there now for that person to find. We're starting this at $9.99, and we're just going to see how it goes. We have one more item to show you in our 20 listings, and then we're going to show you a special item that will be listing number 21 this month. Number 20 is this advertising paperweight. This is for Imboden Milling Company of Wichita, Kansas. Imboden was a really important mill. It was the largest in Wichita. It started in 1874. This is a picture of their building around 1890, when these glass paperweights started to be a thing used as advertising premiums. Every town had to have a mill because you had to be able to mill grains into other things in order to be able to cook and live through the winters, particularly in Kansas, where it could be bitterly cold. They had soft wheat, but they did not have hard winter wheat until Russian Mennonites moved there in the 1870s and brought a strain that could grow in Kansas and grow very successfully. And that is why Imboden Milling started, and they were the first of the modern mills in Wichita, modern for that time. and the largest for many years, expanded several times. Eventually, the mill burned down in 1917 and was not rebuilt. So it had a short but happy life. And this is a really neat advertising paperweight because it shows a real photo of the factory at the time. And people who collect paperweights, a lot of people are really interested in things that show the factory and the way it was produced. That was a big thing in advertising at the time because industrialization was really sweeping across America. And if you were able to show that you were big and substantial, well, that meant people would beat a path to your door. So this was given out by the milling company to remind people that they were big and important. It's a very specific piece to a particular city, and that's what makes it, in my mind, a good thing to put on eBay. We're starting it at $19.99, and we'll see what the value is. These can sell anywhere from $30 to $65, depending what level of local interest there is. So we'll see who discovers this one. And that brings us to our extra listing. This is a very special one-of-a-kind piece, and I'm selling it for a friend of mine, and they do want a price for it. So we're not doing this one on auction. We're going to put this one on at a set price with the best offer possibility. But this is an Ola, and this one with the polychrome, wonderful decoration, is from the Guanacaste part of Costa Rica. Guanacaste in Costa Rica is what we call the Nicoya Peninsula today, and the people who lived there were a mix of Mayans and Aztecs who for various reasons had fled, and they were called the Chorotegas, which means the flowing people, and that was the culture represented in this piece. And it has wonderful legs. The condition is great. If you can hear, it has rattles in the legs. That's that noise you're hearing. And so, because of all of that, this one is a particularly well-detailed and unusual piece. Now, Pre-Columbian art is something that nowadays there's limitations on what you can bring. But back when this piece came in, before 1970, it was allowed to be taken out of the country. One thing about Pre-Columbian art is guaranteeing its authenticity. Now, I am used to doing the moisture test, where you take a little bit of water, you put it on the piece, and when you smell the piece, if it smells like organic material, like rotten garbage, rather than wet clay, then you know you have an original piece. And it does seem to have the right smell to me. But there is a more official test, and we're going to try it right now. And that is to use a heavy mixture of hydrogen peroxide. You want to do this on an area that doesn't have any paint because you don't want to ruin the piece. And if it starts to bubble up, which we can see it doing there, then that indicates that it's an older piece as well. So our belief is that this is a genuine Pre-Columbian piece. It's in wonderful condition. The colors are interesting. The designs are really good. It's one of the better ones of these that I've seen. And I've actually seen quite a bit of Pre-Columbian because I was involved with an antique mall that had a Pre-Columbian specialist. I am going to put this on eBay. My consignor has asked me to put it at a set price, so we'll let you take a look at it on there. But it's a very interesting, rather significant piece, and I'll be curious to see what the response is. Well, I'm so glad we got to bring some different things to you. It's a big mix of unusual and interesting things, and I'm very excited to see what the collector interest in these pieces are. If you want to follow along, you can go to the links in the description below and see how these pieces are doing on eBay. It's a great way to see how our test of the market might be able to inform your buying or your collecting. And if there's things that you're interested in, well, they could be part of your collection as well. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
If you enjoyed this video, check out this one.
Also, click thumbs up to like this video and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help. And we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.